Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Leadership Institute's July Wednesday Wake Up Club Breakfast. I encourage you to live tweet today's events with the hashtag WWCB. In 2020, the Leadership Institute has trained 3,616 students in 67 trainings. And since 1979, your Leadership Institute has trained 226,274 students. We, as I say ordinarily at these luncheons, we do live in interesting times. Certainly some of the most interesting times I've ever lived in. I just want to make a comment about that. I believe that the left is overreaching. I think the American public are going to get their belly full of this, and the non-enforcement of the law against thugs and violent mobs, and I think it's going to have an important impact on the election. I don't think the American people are prepared to give up on the idea of law and order. At the end of this event, you will be directed to the training schedule at our Leadership Institute website, and there you will find all of the upcoming and online trainings. Please take a moment to review these schools and consider attending one or sending a friend to one of our trainings. There will be, at the end of the talk, a chance to ask questions. And please use the Zoom Q&A function to submit a question should you have one, and we'll get to them at the end of our featured speaker. I'm now happy to introduce to you Tiffany Roberts. She's the Communications Training and Studios Coordinator here at the Leadership Institute. She runs various workshops, including on-camera TV trainings and public speaking workshops. Tiffany is also the host of LI's Lead Your Future podcast, where she gives her best tips and advice for launching a conservative career. She has a BA in promotional communications and a minor in marketing from Cleveland State University, where she was also the president of her Turning Point USA chapter. Tiffany is from the Hudson Valley of New York, where she grew up on a farm with horses, chickens, ducks, dogs, and many cats. Tiffany, you should know that I grew up on a farm where we had some of those, but we also had a wonderful Jersey milk cow that my brothers and I milked morning and evening by the manual method. Tiffany?
Thank you so much, Morton. I never knew you had a cow. That's really interesting. I always wanted one.
Martha, wonderful cow.
Oh, okay.
7 years.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much, Morton. And hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Roberts. I'm the Communications Training and Studios Coordinator here at the Leadership Institute. I'm the manager of the on-camera TV training, public speaking workshop, debate workshops, among many others. And my division is just one of many others within the programs department. Now, as everyone knows, we are currently in a pandemic. And as much as COVID has hurt our country, communities, friends, and family, I do believe, at least for LI, it has actually been a blessing. Within my division, I've hosted over 25 online trainings and a webinar since COVID started back in March. Yes, I do get to do these in the comfort of my own home, but I also believe that the great thing about it is that we have the ability to meet, as well as LI has the ability to reach people across the world. And since March, I've met people from New Zealand, Germany, Canada, Puerto Rico, just to name a few. And they're people that I never would have met otherwise. I cannot tell you how many students have told me how grateful they are and how much they've expressed how happy they are to have these trainings hosted online, mostly because taking a trip to Arlington, Virginia isn't always cheap and easy. And a lot are running campaigns in their own state, and they need to, brush up on their debate skills, while others are just high schoolers and they want to become a better debater on their own school bus. I also didn't realize how many people across the world actually have the same beliefs as I do. And the students in these online trainings, they've noticed the same things as well. One of my favorite things is after one of my communications trainings are over, students ask each other to exchange contact information. They either just want to stay in touch, or some of them want to continue the debate skills and on-camera skills with each other over Zoom a few weeks after the trainings are over. And these are students that never would have met each other if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic, as well as LI's ability to quickly move our in-person trainings online. I believe it has pushed the Leadership Institute to achieve our mission in places where people didn't even know about LI. So yes, COVID, it really has been hard for everyone, but I'm thankful to see how the programs department was able to make an impact and support people through this pandemic in ways we never even imagined, just by giving students resources to become stronger conservatives and activists in the public policy process. If you are interested in taking these trainings, as Morton mentioned, you can just check out our website at leadershipinstitute.com/training. And lastly, as Morton mentioned, I am the host of the Lead Your Future podcast. It is Leadership Institute's very first host-driven podcast that I launched back in January. I give my best tips and advice for launching a career, and I do this through my own research, as well as interviews with LI staff members, people in the DMV area, as well as throughout the country. And so if you have a grandkid, or you have a friend or someone you know who just started their career fresh, or if you know someone who is 50 years old and just made a major career change, this is the podcast for them. I cover topics like resumes, business cards, networking, talking to people who disagree with you, and much more. I realized I had a passion for job searching careers, so I'm grateful that I was able to bring my skills and knowledge to LI and create this podcast. But that's all I have for you. Thank you. I hope you guys really enjoy the speaker today. I know you guys will enjoy it. Thank you so much, Morton.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. I believe it's vitally important that conservative leaders are able to communicate a coherent and effective message. The Leadership Institute trains professionals and students only because of the faithful support of the generous donors to the Leadership Institute, and we appreciate the donors who are participating in this online breakfast. Now I'm going to present to you our featured speaker, Brian Glicklich. Glicklich, is it?
It is Glicklich.
Glicklich, okay. Brian is the CEO of Digital Strategies. He's an expert authority and regular broadcast and print communicator on crisis and strategic communications management. Boy, it seems like we are in an era where we're in need of crisis and strategic communications management. Brian's expertise includes digital advocacy, search engine results, reputation management, cybersecurity, and online harassment. He is frequently quoted in broadcast and print media, and works with high-profile individuals and corporations, including the Rush Limbaugh Show and the actor Scott Baio, remediating serious crisis and strategic communications issues. His cases frequently include online reputation management, proxy contests, digital lobbying, in legislative and regulatory adequacy at the state and federal level, criminal or litigation, digital support, search engine results management, labor management conflict, and grassroots advocacy for commerce and other objectives. His past and current clients include Fortune 500 CEOs and their organizations, broadcasters, and many others. Now, should you have any questions for Brian during his talk, just use the Zoom Q&A function to submit a question, and we will take as many questions as we have time to address at the end of his talk. Brian, you're on.
Well, thank you so much, Morton. I appreciate it, and good morning, everyone. That Zoom Q&A function, for anyone who might not be fully familiar with Zoom, is in the lower right side of the bar in this video window. It's marked Q&A, and if you touch it, you can submit a question. And the reason I highlight that at the beginning is because this session today is going to be heavily dependent on your questions. I have a spoiler alert to start with. We're going to be talking about big tech and the monopolies that they've placed on speech and commerce, how they're influencing conservative organizations. And we've got more questions than answers today. We have possible solutions that we're going to talk about, but at the end of the day, this is really an exploration of problems and a look at possible response factors. I do have a short deck that I want to present to you, and I think we're going to probably put that up on the screen and walk our way through it. And then after that, we'll talk about some of the possible solutions here. So, so Deidre, if you can put that up on screen, here it comes, and I'm going to work my way through it. The conversation today is really about big tech and how it affects media and political advocacy. And I don't think in my 25 years of doing this kind of work, I've ever seen as many threats coming from as many different directions as we're seeing today. And, you know, and while we're talking about it in the context of conservative threats, I think it's important to realize that the attack vectors that are being used against conservative speech, conservative commerce, and conservative ideals could just as easily be used against anyone. This is a circumstance that should scare every American, and it's worrisome that it frankly doesn't. It feels to many that we are fundamentally redefining what free speech means in ways that are damaging to democracy. So let's get into it and walk our way through this group of organizations and the ways that they're controlling speech. Why don't we flip to the next slide? There are 4 companies that in total represent a blockade of conservative thought. Google interferes with the business model of websites based on their political content. Facebook acts as an arbiter of hate speech, applying political standards to advertising and content. Twitter fact checks the president, and I use that expression in quotes with great cynicism, by applying political standards to what he says. Amazon refuses entry to their Amazon Smile charity support program on political grounds. This intersection of technology, media, and politics has created new threats to free association and speech. Today, we're going to talk about these issues and some of the different paths to protecting our rights. Those paths are advocacy, legislation, regulation, and litigation. This is a big problem. It may seem overwhelming, but the purpose of having this seminar today, and I'm gratified to see so many participants, is to defend these fundamental rights using our own voices. Why don't we?
Well, looks like we have some technical difficulties. Deirdre's working. Okay, I can hear you again, Brian.
Sorry about that. I don't know where I dropped off, but I apologize. Let's just go on to the next slide, and sorry about that. The current landscape has put basic political freedoms at risk in ways that we haven't seen before. We're going to talk primarily about 3 freedoms today: speech, enterprise, and association. Unique alliances and events have complicated these issues in a way that hasn't been seen before. And why don't we go on to the next slide? Tech stands squarely at the intersection of speech, commerce, and association. Never have so many aspects of our freedom been tied to external forces that are beyond the reach of voting power. And that last phrase is one I hope you will remember, because the real threat to our rights is coming from the reality that these external forces that are operating against free speech are beyond the reach of traditional voting power. Tech companies have formed both a deliberate and accidental barricade through the intersection of control and commerce. Media today is beholden to 2 companies, Google and Facebook, for most of its advertising business model, and the general public is reliant on these same companies for access to information and free expression. Conservative politicians are reliant on one company, Twitter, to evade the idea blockade that's been made. And Amazon holds one of the largest grant charitable support through its Amazon Smile directed giving program. This is the 4th of freedom. And if we could go on to the next slide. These are indeed the monopolies of big tech. And we're going to start with Google. Google is the owner of content discovery and digital advertising revenue. When you're looking for something on the internet, you Google it, which is indicative of their search power. They own 80% plus of the entire market for searches, and that is content discovery. It's impossible to overstate how important this is. When you're looking for something, Google owns the technology that for 80+% of all searches is going to determine what you find. I don't think that's a big surprise to most people, but what you may not know are two other things that they control that interlock with search. They own the dominant share in publisher ad technology as well. Publisher ad technology is what delivers ads, not just to Google search pages, but to a majority of all news and information websites that both conservatives and others use to get information. So when you see ads on Daily Caller or Breitbart or whatever websites you happen to use, those ads are being placed in most cases by Google technology, which drives the ads that they receive. Possibly most worryingly, Google also owns billions of profile data points on every American that uses their search engine. So that means that the behaviors that you do that determine what ads you see are owned in large part by Google with regards to the broad internet. The technology that delivers those ads to websites is owned by Google, and the technology that delivers your content discovery and search is owned by Google. When you put all of this together, Google controls the business model of publishers, which is those news and opinion websites, by determining their revenue model. Google controls an estimated 37.2% of total digital ad spending across the entire internet. And I'll explain why that number isn't higher when we get to the next slide, but that number alone should be terrifying to anyone. It means that Google has effectively their foot on the throat of the business model of basically every publisher in America. If Google doesn't like your content and withholds your ads, then you're basically out of business. If the advertisers that place ads with Google are being advocated to by progressive activists who don't want certain websites to get revenue, then Google adheres to that by some standard of hate speech that they concoct, then they are effectively out of business as well. And I don't think I need to tell anyone that in today's communications climate, political speech as hate speech is the primary business model of the activist left. And possibly the most worrying point, if you're not already completely terrified as I am, is that Google's completely opaque. As a consumer, you can't control your profile meaningfully, meaning that the algorithm that delivers search results and ads based on your behaviors is completely opaque to you and beyond your control. And similarly, publishers have no visibility into the algorithm that determines how Google delivers ads to them or how much they get paid for those ads. It's a black box system that's owned by people who have a political point of view and advocated to by people who have an even more strident political point of view. And it controls the majority share of ad dollars flowing across the internet. Let's go on to the next slide. Facebook is the owner of social content and social advertising revenue. And if you're wondering why Google only owned 37.2% of the total ad spending market, it's because Facebook controls a stunning 83.33% of ad spending in social media, which is gigantic and obviously equals 22.3% of total ad spending. So if you add Google and Facebook together, six out of every $10 spent on digital advertising flows through the hands of two companies. And just like Google, advertising on Facebook requires using their walled garden of technology. They control access to their platform. If you're going to advertise on Facebook, you're going to do it through Facebook's technology and in Facebook's control. And like Google, they've built their own profiling system that contains billions of data points on Facebook members, which drives what ads you see. Obviously, it goes without saying that recent activism has resulted in a nascent boycott of Facebook from large advertisers, which is breaking down Facebook's traditional resistance to restricting speech. What's scary about Facebook is that as bad as they have been to this moment, to recent weeks, the best in terms of defending free speech. They did some experiments a couple of years ago in limiting it, and they fairly quickly reversed them. But now, as activists have gotten to large corporate sponsors with this notion of defining political speech as hate speech, that's starting to break down. Facebook has been willing to place fact check warnings on political content and reduce access to conservative speech, even among audiences that want it. The fact check is particularly insidious because it implies that certain kinds of political opinion speech somehow deserve to be defined as lies. I'm sure you'll be shocked to know that 100% of all fact checks are applied to conservative speech, and liberal speech is never challenged with fact checks. Why don't we go on to the next slide? Twitter is the dominant non-media channel for political speech. Twitter plays a smaller role in advertising than other big tech channels, but its format is uniquely suited to political speech, and it's become the primary channel by which the president bypasses the media and advances his ideas directly to America. Unsurprisingly, the political left has attempted to choke off the president's access to Twitter as a result of this. Also unsurprisingly, Twitter's leadership has been amenable to this and at various points placed warnings or removed political speech that is conservative or belongs to the president of the United States. And I don't know about you, but even as I say those words, it's shocking to me that Twitter, a public for-profit company that has a specific business agenda, feels that they have the right to define, limit, or warn about the leader of the free world's comments and statements. To me, that is one of the most egregious oversteps I have ever seen in political history. They've also banned accounts that contain benign political views that they defined as hate. Let's go on and talk about Amazon, the last of our quad of companies. Amazon is on the leading edge of the effort to defund conservative organizations. They're the world's largest online retailer, and they control an estimated 38% of all online sales in the United States. Huge number. Their charitable grant or foundation, Amazon Smiles, allows customers to designate 0.5% of their purchases to be given to charity, as long as their choice is not listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list, a discredited grudge list of mainstream conservative organizations that have values opposed to SPLC. These organizations are denied participation because Amazon Smile, which has given away over $160 million to foundations, has ceded control of what organizations are eligible to the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's unbelievable. This is, to date, the most successful of the left's efforts to deny funding and business access to conservative organizations. You need to know with great clarity that they are also working in other areas like banking and mutual funds to stigmatize, ostracize, and financially kill businesses that do not adhere to their required beliefs. There's been a great deal of activity to try to force credit card processors and PayPal to stop processing transactions and donations to certain foundations because of their political views. And once again, shockingly, 100% of those political views are based on conservative thought. Why don't we go ahead and continue? So what we're seeing here is that the intersection of commerce and speech is being controlled by big tech. Ad technology and profiling and targeting, ad placement and publisher monetization, content delivery algorithms, which is basically just who sees what on the internet, and social content and political speech. They're applying that to business models as well through access to charitable and financial service and transaction processing, as well as via the control of advertising revenue through profiling and denial of access and third-party boycotts. So if we could go to the next slide. We're going to move at this point away from talking about the problem into a brief discussion of the primary axes that are available to us as solutions. There are not answers in here. There are more questions. There are things that have worked in certain circumstances and may work here, but this is designed to be a thought piece. I'm going to try to hold this to 5 or 6 minutes and then get to as many questions as you have. I'd like to invite you again to touch that Q&A button in the bottom right and queue up questions we can answer later. Also, if you would like a copy of this deck, if you leave a message, I believe the chat is open. If you leave a message there or just find me through another channel, I'll be happy to get a copy of the full deck to you so that you can look at it at your leisure. So let's talk about answers for a few minutes. The traditional answer to these kinds of issues is activism. And the left is very good at activism, and they fund it extremely well. Most activism is not accidental, and it does not happen in a truly grassroots way. It is stimulated by large amounts of money from backstage donors who hide behind a variety of organizations. And that creates what appears to corporations and big tech to be a groundswell of support. Time after time, as someone who's worked on almost every major conservative media boycott to discredit it and eliminate its ability to influence business, I have found over and over again that 80+% of all boycott activism in any single effort, including those directed at the largest names in conservative media, come from an extremely tiny number of people. As I will often say to advertisers who are affected by those boycotts, the number of people who are driving your business model could have fit together with me in the elevator I used to come up to your office today. Everything else is just people and bots copying and pasting what that tiny number of people did. But it works. And we are not effective either at countering it or developing our own counter-activism. I will tell you right now that as a matter of practicality, what does not work in activism is targeting the same advertisers that the left does and demanding that they advertise or that you'll boycott their product. The most likely advertiser, speaking as someone who has spoken to dozens and dozens of them, is that they will throw up their hands and simply stop advertising in all political media because it's too controversial. We work behind the scenes to diffuse those things. However, there are other forms of activism that work. The large organizations that fund this kind of stuff, organizations like Media Matters, Democracy Alliance, and others, have donors. Those donors are readily accessible via foundation financial disclosures, media reports, and others, and exposing those people and asking them why they are funding censorship and hate directed at half of America's population is frequently effective in separating these organizations from their money. And if there's any one thing we could do on an activism basis that would help diminish the threat to conservative speech, it would be choking off the money that funds this kind of activity through a small number of 501c3s and C4s. So activism is one channel. Litigation is another channel. Any number of people have tried to file lawsuits against big tech and against some of the organizations that fund this kind of advocacy. It's a tough path. It's expensive, and the possibility of generating a money award from it is fairly minimal. So it requires finding an egregious and tort-driven objection to what they've been doing. And while we all talk about suing people for what they've done to harm our interests, the path to litigation is one that takes years and costs hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. I do not dissuade from thinking about it, but it's certainly not a magic bullet to this kind of activity. Legislation and regulation are the two others. And that's one that has more promise, especially in the current administration, which we all hope is reelected and gets another 4 years to continue the agenda path that it's been on. I'm not, in general, I'm not a big fan of antitrust legislation. I like to let the free market work. However, in this particular circumstance, I do believe myself that the free market has been warped in an unsustainable way by organizations that have too much power over too many elements of the communications and commerce ecosystem. When you have one organization that has control of search results, ad technology, ad delivery, and profiling, they literally have the ability to control what speech you have access to simply by turning a lever, and that's no good. I watch with interest the Justice Department and Attorney Generals that are looking at antitrust litigation against them. And I believe that it is an interesting path, because if a company like Google were forced to spin out its ad technology and or ad sales business from its search business into a new entity, that would change our life. If they were also forced to accept advertising in their walled garden from other ad companies, it would change things. So just to make that tangible, if a Google search results page or a website that uses Google technology to deliver ads had to take ads from other ad sales companies besides Google, then Google would no longer have control of the business model of conservative websites, because conservatives could introduce their own ad sales organizations to reach out to brands and address their need to speak to the half of America that is conservative. So there are other elements to that, but I've talked for a long time, and I think it would be a good idea to get to your questions. And so for that purpose, Deirdre, are you going to read me these questions, or should I look at them from the panel?
I'm going to have to leave at some point, but I can start off on it. There have been at least a couple of questions talking about competition. One attendee said that from your list of responses, advocacy, litigation, legislation, and regulation, what about competition potentially to keep these entities honest, Brian?
That would be in an ideal circumstance a great solution. Let me explain the problem. The problem with competition as an unfettered solution to this is that there are too many walls in place that prevent it from happening. So Parler may be successful in countering Twitter, and I really hope they are. But it's hard to imagine that when Google has supermajority control of searches, of ad publishing technology, of advertiser publisher relationships, and of profiles, that there's any way for a competitor to break into that. It is analogous to the Bell breakup that occurred 40 years ago, when one organization held so much control over communications that there was no way for others to get through until it was broken up. I guess I should be careful too in saying that I'm not specifically advocating for antitrust, and I suppose it probably sounds like I am. I am exploring, though, that traditional conservative principles, which is let the free market take care of it on its own, sound great, but so far have not even begun to touch the problem, which is getting worse and worse almost every day.
You mentioned Parler. My guess is not everybody is familiar with Parler. Could you explain what that is?
Sure. Twitter has become so egregious at censoring conservative speech in so many ways that a new organization has created a software website that operates in a very similar way to Twitter. And many leading conservative commentators, personalities, online influencers who are conservative are migrating over to it, either as a replacement for Twitter or sitting side by side with it. It's called Parler, which is spelled Parler. And at the very least, if you're active on Twitter, it would be good to form a Parler account as well, so you can see for yourself what's going on over there. It may turn into a de facto location for conservative speech. Just bear in mind that the way the mainstream media will treat it, they will attempt to ostracize it. So the idea of us being able to communicate with the middle of the country, with those who are unaligned with one particular party, will remain minimal there for a long time.
If somebody wanted to begin to be active on Parler, how do they do that?
They would go there and form an account. It's pretty simple, with an email address or a phone number. Parler does have pretty strong security, stronger than Twitter. I actually feel more comfortable with their account management security. So they'll go through a step to verify their email address or their phone. And then after that, they pick people to follow, and they can read and see what's being communicated there. If Twitter calls a message a tweet, Parler calls it a parley. Same idea. And you can follow what conservative thought leaders have to say when they're speaking mostly to conservatives, and don't have to parse every word for what the thought police might think about it.
Barbara Dello asked the question, is Yahoo an alternative to bypass the Google monopoly?
I'll give you a better alternative. It is an alternative to bypass the Google monopoly. However, it's part of its own mini monopoly. It's got a single digit of search engine result action belonging to it. It's in partnership with Microsoft on ad sales and so on. So it's not an ideal solution, but there is one that is very, very good. There is a search engine called DuckDuckGo, like the old kids game, DuckDuckGo, which as its model does not profile and does not collect information on users. They do display ads, but those ads are not based on the things that you search for or information that they know about you. So it is a good, safer way that also denies Google access to their information. If you've been active on Google, there are ways, and it's complicated enough that it would be hard to take on the details here, but there are ways if you log into Google because you have a Google account, because you use free Gmail or one of their other services, to delete your profile information so that they cannot continue to target you. But if you want that to work on a permanent basis, you basically have to renounce all Google tools, which is very difficult for some people to do.
Michael Geary has a question. He says, we've already seen that government, justice, and FDIC have brought commerce and denied access to capital to various businesses based on their types of commerce. He gives examples, guns in the adult industry. What specific barricades could be put in place to stop this recent practice? And is there a danger of big tech and government forming a quiet relationship, teaming up to make this practice permanent?
It is a huge issue and very worrisome. Guns in particular are such a scary area because many banks have simply made an arbitrary decision that they will no longer do business with lawful manufacturers of firearms. And it's a frontal attack on the Second Amendment. And those very same activists that we talked about earlier are behind it. One of the ideas I've been quietly advocating for, it would be the development of an Internet Bill of Rights that would be a Bill of Rights document updated for the digital age that on a personal level would guarantee individuals control of the algorithm that displays search results and other kinds of content, and their ability to flip an off switch on it and have their results unfiltered. Same thing with advertising. And on a business level, would guarantee access to financial services and digital services without regard to what business they're in or what positions they advocate. If people want to choke off that line of business to an individual organization and feel that it's justified under the laws of the United States, they should be forced to do so by filing a lawsuit and litigating it to a successful conclusion, rather than organizations being able to arbitrarily do so.
David Lindsay asks, are any of the other search engines considered to be less biased against conservatives than Google?
I would say that that DuckDuckGo is the search engine that is most neutral in its results. If you need to use Google, the best way to do it is to look up in the top right corner of the Google search screen and make sure that you are not logged into it with an account. It will show you if you have a profile and an account up there, and if you are not logged in, it's very limited in what information it can collect about you or how it can alter search results. And again, as worrisome as search results are, and they are worrisome, I just want to emphasize to everyone that the biggest threat to conservative thought and free speech is not from Google's alteration of search results or content display. It's from the way that they can control the revenue model of the websites you rely on. If you use Breitbart, if you use Daily Caller, if you use other mainstream conservative sites, almost every one of them is highly reliant on revenue from Google through advertising on their website, not on Google, but on their website, in order to generate the income they use to pay reporters, pay for technology, and do the things that they do. The reason that they're so reliant on Google is because Google has an overwhelming share of that business. And if you don't use Google, there isn't another company who can replace them and generate similar revenue. The ability of Google to choke that off, or third-party activists to convince large brands to put these websites on a do not display list, which is very common, is the number one issue many conservative websites. And without finances, they simply won't be able to continue. So I am about content display. If you start thinking instead about business models, you will be a lot farther down the road of the biggest problem facing conservative speech.
Sharon Williams asks, will this presentation be recorded for future viewing? Deirdre, would you explain how people can access this presentation and other presentations at the Wednesday Wake Up Club Breakfast? Deirdre?
Yes, so we are live streaming actually right now, and you can watch that live stream on Facebook. We also put up the recording after the fact on YouTube, and I can share that link to all of the attendees here after the end of this event.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee asked this question: what would you say to people who believe that these companies have a right to control what speech is on their platforms by dint of their being a private company? It says the First Amendment covers government control of speech, not speech on private platforms.
You know what? You're absolutely right. The First Amendment does limit this to government speech, and private speech is excluded. However, we are a country of laws, and we have a variety of other laws to make sure that private companies or publicly traded companies do not use their power to control thought or expression unfairly. And many people believe that that's what's going on. This is not fundamentally a First Amendment issue. It is an issue of activism, legislation, litigation, and regulation.
All right, thank you. The question is, can regulation restore free speech without becoming just another filter that controls what speech is allowed to be heard?
You know, that is a great question. And I think our obligation as citizens has always been to act as the check on what government does. One of the things I said early in this presentation is about how big tech is outside the reach of voting power. If regulation starts to restore our rights, that regulation is well inside the reach of voting power, and we can control it.
Okay. Paul Appel asks, where can I get a list of donors to Media Matters and other similar organizations?
Well, I am simply delighted that you asked that question. The financial form that foundations use in order to be able to be nonprofit is called a 990 form. And 990 forms of 501c3s are required to list all donors. You can find 990s in a variety of places on the internet. An organization that I otherwise greatly dislike called ProPublica actually has a very good free database of 990s, and you can find them there. In the case of organizations like Media Matters that have been well studied, you can do some searching on DuckDuckGo as well and find lots of media stories that have been written about their donors. My experience, by the way, is that these donors often prefer to lurk in shadows, and when attention is called to them in public, they do not like it at all. And of course, we are in the business of doing things that our opposition dislikes.
Dan Neff asks, what impact does George Soros and his network of resources really have in relation to this discussion?
Well, Soros was one of the biggest initial backers of Media Matters. And so he seeded and provided many millions of dollars to it. He's also one of the backers of an organization that you've probably never heard of called Democracy Alliance, that is probably the most difficult, painful organization that organizes many, many, many different progressive advocacies and funds them. So if you think about lots of the little tiny progressive organizations that work in one area, there are, Color of Change that works on African-American issues, and there are dozens of others related to identity politic issues or other advocacies. All of those were developed and funded by Democracy Alliance, which is a network of very high dollar donors that put money into a pool to award to these organizations. And Soros was one of the initial funders of those. What's he doing today about it? He's got it pretty well covered up. So whatever he's funding, no one can find at this moment. Hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, our side will develop the funding and the will to do a forensic financial investigation of Soros, SPLC, and others. And I think we'll find that a very small number of people and organizations are behind a tremendous amount of funding to control American life and thought.
Marina Mason asks, in your experience, what has been the most effective medium for conservative political candidates to sidestep mainstream media to get the message out directly to citizens and voters, or just to get our side of the story out? Twitter,
I think
Twitter is an option, although most regular citizens are not on that platform. Any other suggestions?
I think we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to mainstream conservative media for the amount of coverage that they give to the president. You may have specific quarrels with how any one of them covers specific issues, but whether it's websites or broadcast media, they do cover what the president actually says, and they do it without a lot of spin. I do think that one of the lessons we're learning today about how we digest information is that it's no longer okay to rely on any media to tell you what someone thinks, nor do you need to. What the president has to say is available every day in the president's own words, whether it's from the White House website, from the press conferences they give, from Twitter if you're on there, or from others who cover what he says in a neutral kind of way. But I would tend to rely on going back to the source. And if you want to understand conservative politics and how the president's approaching it, and you dedicated 15 minutes a day to just reading what's on the White House website, you would be a long way ahead of your counterparts in figuring that out.
Mark Tover asks, are there strategies to avoid labeling or censorship, such as hate speech, but still get the message across? For example, if you state that group XYZ is racist and violent, will that be blocked? But if you ask if group XYZ is violent or racist when they do something, will that get past the censors?
It's got a better chance of getting past them, but these standards are changing. In general, the approach that I favor, because our side is supposed to be the elevated thinkers, the people who really contemplate these issues and don't apply broad labels. It's kind of the way you discipline your children. You don't identify them with a label, but you identify their specific actions instead. So instead of calling an organization racist or speech controlling or whatever, find an example and talk about that example and why it fits that category. That's a way that we can elevate the conversation and put ourselves in a different category from what our opposition does to us.
Natalia Middlestop asks, many conservatives argue that tech companies are private businesses, so legally free speech enforcement doesn't apply to them, but only to the government. Some conservatives suggest that companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter should be labeled as publishers rather than platforms, and thus have to follow the laws that, for example, the New York Times has to. Do you think that's a potential solution?
I think that is a partial solution, yes. I think that the section of the CDA that defines big tech organizations as effectively immune from any liability for what is published on their platform is one of the things that lets them get away with this. Similarly, however, there are a number of legal protections that are offered to mainstream media that allow them to do the things they do. The most prominent are shield laws that exist in many states that give reporters almost unlimited ability to say anything they want and not be able to be sued for it, no matter how egregiously wrong it is. If we were to roll back these laws, which many would argue on our side is simply a redirection of protections to let the marketplace decide what's right and what's wrong, we would go a long way to forcing publishers and big tech to rethink what they write.
Thanks. I have time to give you one more question, then I'll have to turn it over to Deidre because I have to go chair another live meeting. This is from an anonymous attendee, Brian. What is your opinion of the Start Page search engine?
I have to tell you, I'm not familiar with it, so I will go look at it and formulate an opinion, but I don't have one at this moment.
Okay, Deirdre, you have to take over. Thank you.
All right. So it looks like we're almost out of time here, but a few of the questions that we've glossed over have asked questions about, you've mentioned DuckDuckGo, you've mentioned Parler. Are there other search engines that could replace functions like Google can? A lot of people have, like you mentioned, have their email address on there, etc. Are there other platforms or search engines that you are particularly fond of right now that could be giving the others a run for their money?
I'm fond of distributing the things that I do around different websites so that no one organization knows too much about me. There are free email services that are available that are either offshored or completely anonymous and that don't collect profile information in order to sell advertising. I do want to remind everybody of an old saying that I'm sure many of you know, which is that if a company provides you something for free, it means that you and your information are the product. So if you're getting something of value and you're not paying for it, that company is making money by selling information about you instead. So sometimes, especially in the course of key things that are important to you, like email, it might be worth contemplating paying a small amount of money in order to protect your privacy. For example, Proton Mail, which is offshored and outside the reach of U.S. Courts, maintains a security profile that's so powerful that if you forget your password, you lose everything in your email. They can't resupply it to you. Obviously, something to use with caution, but in terms of encrypted email that's encrypted when it's in motion and when it's at rest, there really isn't anything better.
Right, makes sense. We have another question. If it says, I'm a conservative business owner, and I'm wondering, other than the things that you've already mentioned, is there a way that I can optimize my search engine optimization and building things like you were talking about on my website where I can still get revenue and maybe circumvent some of the restrictions that have been put in place by these various search engines and social media platforms?
It's a great question, and it's a huge topic that's well outside the minute or two we have. I will just say that the answer is yes. There are ways to mitigate large parts of it. The first and easiest answer is to develop content and place it on a very frequent basis, like every day, that uses the right combination of keywords and ideas to be both popular and to be visible to search engines, and make sure that your website is built in such a way technologically so that it is fully transparent and you can be discovered without advertising.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Brian. This has been very enlightening for me and I think a lot of our audience. Thank you so much for being on, and we will be sending you an Adam Smith tie in the mail like we do all of our breakfast speakers, so keep an eye out for that.
Excellent, can't wait.
So everyone that's joining us now, please join us on August 5 for hopefully Cheryl Atkinson, pending her schedule. She's a busy lady, so we're going to try to snag her for August, and I hope we see you all there. In the meantime, have a happy Independence Day on July 4, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for watching this video. To watch our latest video, click here. And to make sure you don't miss any future videos, be sure to subscribe.